Greetings, you Bible-loving people. We want to offer a clear and exceptional explanation of the book of Revelation by Burton Barber. Since all was recorded in the 1970s, this will be audio, and we have added nature scenes to help. All can be purchased in permanent form on 4 discs for $35 postage paid. Check the options below, and may the Lord bless this exciting learning time ahead for you.
People wonder why it is that we can get our feet on the ground and feel we at least have a beginning. This is a book of symbols. The revelation of Jesus Christ to his servant John, and he said he signified it to his servant John, or he symbolized it. He gave it as signs. It's always been a curious thing to me as to why he did it. But 2 things stand out. Number 1 is John was on the Isle of Patmos because he was exiled there. And they didn't have air mail system to lift it up with helicopter and distribute it without any questions asked. They censored the mail. Now you can well presume in your own mind what would happen if he is referring to the Roman Empire in this, and I believe that he is, if all of a sudden they would come across this book of Revelation written to the 7 churches of Asia, telling that the Roman Empire was an enemy of the church, and that God was angry with this empire, and in due time he would destroy that empire. How far would those letters get? Number 2, there happens to be a book in the Bible, the book of Daniel, that clearly prophesied of the empire of Rome. So by simply using the symbols of the book of Daniel and referring to the Roman Empire, those people who are Christians in the 7 churches of Asia could understand, and those poor censoring Roman soldiers could not. Maybe that's not the right explanation, but it seems a strong likelihood to me. How do we know that we are able to begin at the right point? For 3 simple reasons. As he opens the book in chapter 1, or 4 and verse 1, he lays down a beginning place. He said in chapter 4 and verse 1, I want to show you, John, the things that shall be hereafter. So they had to be after John's day, not before. Restating what I did before, there is a theory that says that all of the book of Revelation was fulfilled in and around the time of the fall of Jerusalem under Nero. Now that couldn't be, because John was alive long after that. He said the things that shall be hereafter. This was 96, or 7 give or take. 97, Domitian died. John was exiled under Domitian. So we give the date at approximately 96 as a safe date. Number 2, in the 1st chapter and verse 1, then again in the last chapter, chapter 22 and verse 6, he said, the things that must shortly come to pass. Things that must shortly come to pass. Or, as the Greek says, shortly in sequence will begin to come to pass. It seems a very simple way to translate it. Things that must shortly begin to come to pass. And many people become fidgety and they'll say, preacher, how short is short? You know, kind of like the short hair of women, how short, short, how long is long. He tells us. He leaves nothing to doubt. In this same 1st chapter and verse 3, and the 22nd chapter and verse 10, he tells us the time is at hand. There's no doubt in the mind of John, nor in our mind, as the beginning point of the fulfillment of the events. To me, it's absolutely unthinkable that the book of Revelation would yet be future and God would have not noticed the things that have happened the past 2,000 years. I say I can think of nothing that would be any more ridiculous. These have been momentous things. We'll see it tonight and the next few nights. Noticing this, we want to begin at a point. What part will we begin? We have already seen in rapid sequence the church as it was beset by the enemy, political Rome. We will still see political Rome, but quickly political Rome will give way to papal Rome. Or this is a study of the church as beset by apostasy. So it's the same church, the same period of time, but a different enemy. Let's take a look and see what we have. We have the main stream that runs down through the chart, giving us the dates. Some significant dates that we will see tonight. We've already pointed out 96. The other night we emphasized 323. That's the time when Rome was changed to Constantinople. But you'll see this is an important one tonight. 476. The next one is 533. And the next one is 800. Those you want to remember. These are key dates. Open your Bibles tonight to the book of Revelation. And this is chapter 12. Chapter 12. These are stated on the chart. The first 6 verses, which is starting actually with the last verse of chapter 11, 19, through the first 6 verses of chapter 12. Here the church is pictured as a woman. And there is war between the woman and a dragon. And Michael assists a woman in this battle. Let's read about it. Verse 19 of chapter 11. And the temple of God was opened in heaven. And there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament, covenant. And there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail. In the book of Revelation, when some significant event is to happen, whether it's God in chapter 4 or it's some event, this is a similar description. He doesn't say what is going to happen in that verse, but it soon follows. Now, mind you, he's stating in heaven. But the question is, did all this take place in the sovereign room of God's throne? Hardly. Chapter 4 doesn't describe any of this in the sovereign room of God. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Now people say, who would that be? There have been among many 2 explanations. One, of course, that this is Mary, and that the child she shall give birth to, Jesus. Then we would say what is meant by the sun and the moon and the crowns, or upon her head a crown rather, and 12 stars. What would these be? Many people have explanations. Some say the moon is a reflected ball out in space, and therefore it'd be the Old Testament reflecting the New Testament. That sounds logical. Then, of course, what is the sun, and what are the stars? 12 stars, or 12 apostles. I want to be frank with you. To me, I started to say I could care less. Really, I'd like to know. I don't believe that trying to analyze and understand what these are, the stars, the sun, and the moon, is going to make that much difference and understand what he's going to say. What I choose rather to do is to hang it on a nail. If by God's grace I can arrive at something that satisfies my mind, very well. But let's hang it on a nail as far as we're concerned tonight. She, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. The New Testament represents Jesus Christ, all right. But the New Testament represents the woman as being the church. And the church did not give Christ, as Catholics teach. Christ gave the church. So let's avoid Roman Catholicism's concept of this. Thus they say the church gave Christ, and the church is more right than Christ, because they can change the laws and the practices. Now the New Testament represents the church as a mother. Galatians chapter 4, for instance, in verse 26, in the allegory which the apostle gives. And Jerusalem which is above is a mother of us all. And then again in verse 31, ye are not the children of the bondwoman, or referring to the law, but of the free. The new covenant, not the old. So we're children. In what sense is the church the mother? Well, of course, it's the mother that is the vehicle for bringing a child into the world. The father may beget a child. The mother carries the child and delivers the child, exactly as the church wins people to Christ and brings them into the world. The church does not give life. The church brings about the birth. And in that sense, I'm confident he says, and Jerusalem which is above is the mother of us all. And we're children of the free woman. But it doesn't stop there. Not at all. Romans chapter 7 and verse 4. Ye are become dead to the law by the body of Christ, that ye should be married to another, even to him who is raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit unto God. What is the fruit of marriage? What is the fruit of husband and wife? What is the fruit of the home? Children. This then has a simple explanation. We are not picking up something new. This is taught in the Bible, that the church is a mother. This then would be a period of time in which there would be growth of the church. We have seen it. For instance, after the fifth seal, when it said more would die, there is a period of growth in which he held back the forces that would destroy the Roman Empire and permit the hordes to move in upon the church. The Bible says that he restrained them, and those that had the four winds were held back, so the church could grow and mature. And this is a period of growth, of stabilizing. So that we know. Verse 3. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, not in heaven as we think of heaven, the throne of God, but it's much like seeing a large movie in the sky. He sees in the book of Revelation in heaven many times, like chapter 4, for instance. But all of these did not happen in heaven. They happened upon the earth. And behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. You may hold your Bible, if you wish, at that point and turn to the book of Daniel. We want to ask a question about this great dragon. On this chart to your left can be found 3 visions, one in chapter 2, chapter 7, and chapter 8. We are particularly interested in chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. He sees some animals. This is said to be in the great sea that these animals emerge. Verse 3, 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. They did. This is the great sea, the Mediterranean Sea. This is the surrounding territory of all of that activity. This is a territory surrounding it, north and south. And from that area came up 4 great ones. Now, I wonder who these are, these kingdoms. The first was like a lion. And of course, that was the Babylonian, as you'll see. Vision number 2 gives us a description concerning the great lion. They have found in the remains of Babylon the lion with eagle's wings. You remember seeing that in your Bible dictionary? Eagle's wings I beheld, till the wings thereof were plucked, and it lifted up from the earth, and made to stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. You remember that under Belshazzar, I presume. Nebuchadnezzar, rather, and then it was Belshazzar that turned against that. But it was Nebuchadnezzar that in his later years lost his sanity, out of the palace for 7 years. He regained his sanity, walked back in the palace, and glorified God. He regained his sanity. But under Belshazzar it fell. Verse 5. And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. Those 3 countries were Lydia, Media, and Persia. We have them named in history. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had on the back of it 4 wings. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Take a look under the Grecian, for instance. The leopard had 4 wings and 4 heads. It became a divided one. It became a divided one. There were 6 generals when Alexander the Great died. 2 of these were out of the way at the point that they took over the kingdoms, and there they are, and the countries they took over. Thus the 4 kingdoms soon were reduced to 2 kingdoms, which became Syria and Egypt. You'll notice thus north and south of the Great Sea. You say, this isn't hard, is it? It is not hard at all. Now, before we proceed any farther, let's turn over to the 8th chapter, where he sees the 3rd vision. Now, by this time, the Babylonian kingdom is gone. It's off the scene. Now, he likewise sees, in this instance, he sees a ram with 2 horns, and he sees a rough he-goat. Now, that rough he-goat was a speedy guy, because it says that his feet didn't touch the ground. He was jet propelled. He moved. That was Alexander the Great. Do you doubt that this would be the Medes and the Persians? Look at verses 20 and 21. The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns of the kings of Media and Persia. There's no guesswork about this, friend. You have the Babylonian kingdom number 1. It's out of the way. We've passed it by. It's fallen. It's fallen in the hands of the Medes and Persians. They are the successors. Now he tells us that this great ram with 2 horns, Mede and Persia, represents Media Persia. The next verse, 21, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. And of course that was Alexander the Great. Now here we're brought all the way down to the Roman Empire. You see that? There's no guesswork about it. Let's turn back to the 7th chapter. He sees, it's Daniel having the visions, and he sees these kingdoms in this language, verse 7. After this, after number 3, after the Grecian, which is called the leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. Now, if you'll just pause long enough to take a look at number 2, chapter number 2, where the Babylonian empire is represented. You have a head of gold. You have the breast and arms of silver. The belly and thighs of brass. Look unto the Roman. Legs and feet of iron and clay. Great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before. Why? Those Babylonian, Media Persia, and Grecian were kingdoms. The Roman government was an empire composed of many kingdoms. Now, prior to that time, it was one kingdom that conquered another kingdom. until the third kingdom conquered that kingdom. But now there's a Roman Empire that's totally diverse from all the rest. In fact, it embraced and consumed all those previous kingdoms and many more. So this one is diverse from all the rest. It says from the beast that were forth, and it had 10 horns. That's exactly the number of horns we found in that dragon. We haven't forgotten where we were, see, Brother Frank? We were at the 12th chapter of Revelation. But that dragon had 10 horns. Here this beast has 10 horns, and I considered the horns, and beheld there came up among them another little horn. There came up another little horn. And that's something, isn't it? If you'll just take a look under the Roman, the terrible, powerful beast had a little horn who plucked up 3 horns of the beast. That's what it says. Before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. Now, it's a period of time when the empire would have 3 horns, or kingdoms. We'll come to the time when there'd be 10 kingdoms in the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire wasn't always an empire. It wasn't an empire until about 31 years before Jesus was born. Caesar Augustus was the first of the emperors. Prior to that, they had, first of all, kings, had 5 different forms of government until they settled upon number 6, which was the imperial form. So there would have to be a period of time in which there were 10 kingdoms composing 10 different separate authorities or domains. And then when we locate a time when there were 10, we also watch till there's going to be another one come up, which is number 11, and we watch that number 11th one until he plucks 3 up. Now, we have to find that in history, or this is not going to be fulfilled, or we won't know what it is. Because he said it was going to happen. And if he said it was going to happen, I believe it. So I want to look for those times, but he's not through. And behold, in this horn, the 11th one, were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Well, he says more about this, but let's just drop down to verse 23 where he describes this. Maybe he can fill us in a little bit. Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth. Now, doesn't that spell it out? Count for yourself. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5, but the 5th one is different. It's the heavenly kingdom. He's talking about political kingdoms. And it's the 4th one, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms. It'll be different. And shall devour the whole earth. And the Roman Empire conquered more than any of these others. And shall tread it down and break it in pieces. It did. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings. He spells it out what the horns are. Or they have the same word for king and kingdom, depending upon whether they spoke of the subjects or the ruler. And here he's not referring just to a single man in a given case, but rather to 10 sovereigns, domains, or kingdoms that shall arise. So then there was to be a time when 10 different separate kingdoms would come into existence, and another shall rise after them. So after they come in existence, there'll be an 11th one, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. I want you to notice, this 11th one will be instrumental in plucking up 3 of the 10s. You see it spelled out? Is this getting hard for you? Okay, get your 2 hands up here and count 10. Stick your foot up, and that's number 11. It'll pluck 3 of those. That's it. It'll pluck 3 of them up. That's what he's saying. But that's not all that he says. And he shall speak great words against the Most High. Now, this is going to be a religious institution, see. It's going to be diverse from the political. Speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. We're talking about a time, people, of persecution. If you doubt it, stay with us. Wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and half a time. And take a look at it tonight. You see the little horn that came up? I mean to say that was the 11th one. That was the Roman Catholic Church. I think we can show it to you. The three that were plucked up, Lombardy, the Exarchate of Vienna, and the state of Rome, or what had been Rome and its environs. And starting with 533, this date that we noted the other night, all the way through to 1793 is a period of great persecution. So you have it, a time and times and dividing a time. Time, 1 year, times 2 years and a half, that's 3.5 years, or 1,260 days, he spells it out, or 42 months. And we told you the other night that this is found 4 times right here in Revelation, plus this time in Daniel. Thus we have it laid out in unmistakable language. And as far as 3.5 years, nothing happens in that short a time. 42 months is the same as 3.5 years, is the same as 1,260 days, all the same counted up. It's all the same number of days or period of time. But if a day represents a year, we have something precise. And I think we'll follow that up again this evening. Thus we can see that there is a religious horn or power to come into existence. It would pluck up 3 of these 10 in the Roman Empire. Verse 26, but the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. Now, maybe not tonight, but tomorrow night we're going to read that to you in very plain language in chapter 17, because chapter 17 is the place where he pauses to describe what it's all about. You see, we have 3 chapters. After we've come to the end of time again, we call them supplemental chapters. The harlot, her daughters, and the beast described in chapter 17. He will tell more in detail about this beast and more about the woman that rides upon her in chapter 17. And the fall of Babylon, which is the apostate religion, in chapter 18, 19 through 10, and the final conflict. But tomorrow night, we'll be in chapter 17 for sure. Let us turn back then to chapter 12 and see if we can't identify this great dragon. This, in verse 3, that he is describing is called a red dragon. You said, where does that fit into history? Well, it may be of little help if I read to you something here. This is the shortest thing I have with me, but would you come up here a minute? You can't see this. I want this young man to see this. This is an actual picture, an engraving of the red dragon we're going to be reading about. See that? Now that's what it looked like, because they had it up much like what they call a sock in the airfield, and the wind blew through there and howled. That's a dragon. Thank you. Now, you just ask him. He's seen it. I want to read this to you a little bit tonight. It's taken from several of the historians, and this is talking about the Roman Empire. You say, where does the dragon fit in? Well, it's very interesting. This is given to us by a man by the name of Ammonaeus Marcellinus. And, of course, that's chapter 16 and verse 10 in his writings. Here's what he said. He's describing this standard. The dragon was covered with purple cloth and fastened to the end of a pike gilt and adorned with precious stones. It opened its wide throat, and the wind blew through it, and it hissed as if in a rage, with its tail floating in several folds through the air. His further description is purple red. Now, the purple he's talking about, as he gives, is purple red, which is much like a rhodamine, very brilliant red. This was the Roman ensign. The dragon was first used as an ensign, not ensign, not belonging to the Navy, ensign, near the close of the 2nd century. That's about where we're talking about. Not quite yet. It was used close at the 2nd century of the Christian era, and was not until the 3rd century that its use became common. Now, 3rd century is the 200s. See that? And the reference would be to the period of Roman power when this had become a common standard and when the applicability of this image would be readily understood. So he is saying that the eagle was the common Roman ensign, which everyone knows. That's what they had on their flags, and they carried them into battle. In the 3rd century, Mr. Elliot continues, in the 3rd century it had become almost as notorious or notable among Roman ensigns as the eagle itself, and is in the 4th century noted by Prudentius, Vegetius, Chrysostom, and the author that I just gave you. He enumerates other authors, historians. So, you see, they had an ensign which they used was exactly what he is saying, the dragon. But you'll notice that these two authors that we've quoted from tonight pointed at a time precisely where we are. And we're talking about a time when the church is growing, this era. This is a time when persecution ended under Constantine. Ended under Constantine. A period of time in which there was persecution, indeed. But that persecution ended, starting here, was not resumed until this point. So likely what we have at this point will be from 323 to 533. The other night we read to you extensively of the persecution of Justinian, which was 533. But Constantine relieved the persecution, declared Christianity to be the state religion. Thus you had little or no persecution from 323 until 533. There is birth. But listen, something appears on the scene. There is, in verse 4, action on the part of the dragon, the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. Now the third part described by Mr. Gibbon was 1/3, which was described by him as being 3 parts of the world, which was the Franks, or Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the Saracens, or the Arabians. Thus we will find that there is a plucking up of 1/3 of these stars, and did cast them to the earth, and the dragon stood before the woman, now ready to persecute, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Somebody said, why one child? The Bible figures always remain consistent with the illustration. Dogs have litters, and cats have litters, but women usually have just one baby at a time. Right? That's right. I mean, Jesus always in his illustrations, he didn't go wild on his illustrations and tell some far out kind of a thing about farming. It was simple. The sower went out to sow. He told the truth. You know, they wouldn't think he was really far out if he stayed according to facts. And this illustration simply represents a child born. And she brought forth a man-child who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron. This is described to us 2 times in the book of Revelation. We'll get that a little later. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. So it's apparently a time of persecution, and the child was caught up. No more is said of this at the point. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God. Now these same people that were persecuted, chapter 6 tells us, under the 5th seal, were under the throne of God, crying out, how long will it be, Lord, till you take vengeance on those that killed us? So the persecuted one was caught up to the throne of God. Previously described as crying out, how long will it be? What happened to the church? Fled in obscurity. Fled in the wilderness. Well, cowardice? Hardly. Where she hath a place prepared of God. Yes, it's going to be a long haul, people. 1,260 years of persecution. Look at the Dark Ages. It wasn't a matter of simply waiting till things blew over. They were to be in a place of obscurity. The church was in the wilderness, prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. or years, just like Elijah was fed. Now we're ready to come to number 2. That's this one over here, in which the church was temporarily delivered from persecution. Temporarily delivered from persecution. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. So God prevailed. Heavenly angels fighting an ungodly pagan institution or kingdom or empire. He tells us further, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the scene, wherever the scene was, he sees it as though in heaven, cast out. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down. So there is a victory for God and for the saints. That's this period of time we were telling you, the period of the relenting, not the unrelenting, but the relenting persecution from 323 to 533. The accuser was cast down, which accused them before God day and night, and they overcame him. How do Christians overcome? Not with sword, not with guns, not with tanks. Here's the victory, my friend. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. Now, if you'll take note, we have here plural. But before, it was singular, it was a man-child. But it wasn't just one man-child. That was a symbolism, yes. But as he moves away from the symbolism, he's now describing, and he uses the word they. It's plural. It's the saints of God. Now, we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of the testimony, the gospel of Christ, and by our faithfulness. The word of God, our testimony. They loved not their lives. They weren't saying, I've got to live regardless. I must preserve myself. I have to have the easy way. They loved not their lives unto the death. And that's what it takes sometimes. You know, the Halls have told me several times of the things that they are doing. You know, after you leave communism and some of the activities, it gets kind of rough. Many people have been killed. They have said, we would not at all be surprised if we are killed. Because they are aggressive in the things that they once were against. And they're aggressive against the things they were once for. Well, they like to live like everyone else, but I'm going to tell you something. This is where the wool gets tight and separates the men from the boys. We're living in troublous times because we're living in easy times. And if there's a time we need some hardship and the stomach rubbing against their backbone, it's right now. People are so pampered, they get picky when they come at the table. And I can remember when I was a boy, we were glad to have some plain old cornmeal mush night after night, and that's all we had. Didn't think anything about it, because that's what the neighbors ate. That's God's truth. I'm telling you the truth. These people didn't love their lives unto the death. They didn't think that it was a thing to be had at all costs, like Jesus didn't think that his life and equality with God was a thing that had to be grasped or held on to. Lord, I want to live, I want to live. They didn't act that way. They said, Lord, we'll be faithful to you if we have to die. Be thou faithful unto death. Revelation 2:10 says, and I'll give you a crown of life. And that unto death is literally translated, if you have to die for it. You see, that's the way we're overcomers. We're overcomers. Someone said the other day, said, preacher, said, you know, the enemy's getting their tanks and their guns. I think we better do the same thing. You don't win that kind of a battle. You know that? The man that takes up the sword is going to perish by it. Jesus said that to one of his apostles. Peter didn't know it at that time. Jesus is explaining it to him. My kingdom is not of this world. These were overcomers. Therefore rejoice, O ye heavens, or rather ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth. Now persecution is ahead. Persecution is ahead. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that it hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, or cast out of his high throne, his high hold, he's not dead. He's not powerless. He simply lost the first battle. But he said, I might have lost the first battle, I won't lose the war. So he keeps fighting. He persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. He persecuted. So the woman is in the wilderness. Now we are ready to show you a transition. And this transition is going to be from one form of the Roman Empire to another form. This is number one. Imperial Rome was wounded, but the ideology and the glory of both ancient and pagan Christianized form, that is, there was the ancient pagan form, now in its Christianized form, combines to fight the church. Let's see the transition. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. Now you know who that serpent is. That serpent is the devil himself. Of course. But he's using political forms. Thus we have this period of time, 1,260 years. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, to drown her, of course, that he might cause her to be carried away in the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. And you say, where does this take us, preacher? I tell you where it takes us. It takes us away from the old pagan form. The old pagan religion of the Roman Empire into a Christianized form, and it'll take us to the time of 476. Let's read again. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea. Isn't it exactly what we read in the 7th chapter when he's describing the Roman Empire? Having 7 heads and 10 horns. That's what Daniel said. Describing the Roman Empire. We're not guessing, folks. We're letting God tell us. And upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. So we can look for a period of time in which there will be blasphemy. Now, of course, the thing that we'll be aiming at before we have finished, it's a time when it is called, what do you think? What do you read? You read that? The Holy Roman Empire. You see, it's not going to be just the Roman Empire. That's starting in 800 under Charlemagne. Now, that isn't exactly at this point, but that's what it's coming to. This beast that Daniel saw, the Roman Empire, was going to change from the old dragon form through a Christianized form under Constantine, and would become a great beast of blasphemy. A holy Roman Empire when it was not holy. And anything that's called holy when it isn't is blasphemy. That's what blasphemy is. He describes further. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power. So the old pagan empire with 10 horns gave to this new form of the Roman Empire its power and his seat and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death. Now he's already describes that this thing has 7 heads. Daniel didn't say anything about 7 heads, but we'll see it in chapter 17. 7 heads. One of these is wounded to death, was healed. And the world wondered. Wonder what that could be, people. What do you think it could be? All I know to do is to take you to the Roman Catholic Bible. You think that might help us a little bit? This is the Confraternity translation. When I was in school in San Jose, California, I tried to buy one. The Catholic bookstore says, we can't sell it to you. You have to prove you're a Catholic first. So I bought me a second-handed one. In Minneapolis, I had loaned mine all out, and I needed one, and I went to the Catholic bookstore, and I said, I'd like to buy a confraternity edition, and nobody knew what it was. Times are changing. But I want to read the footnote which they give to us in chapter 13, which is what we're reading right now, a little farther along. And this is the 13th chapter, verse 1. You know, we read about this beast. The picture of the first beast is based on the 7th chapter of Daniel. Not far off, are they? This beast is a figure of the kingdoms of the world. That's right. Kingdoms founded on passion and selfishness, which in every age are antagonistic to Christ and seek to oppress the servants of God. Imperial Rome represents this power. Imperial Rome. Now, if you just remember, he's talking about Imperial Rome, the same one that Daniel's talking about, and then turn over to another one, which is chapter 14. A footnote under Babylon says, Babylon was a synonym of Rome. We're getting a little closer. But he describes it in chapter 17 and verse 11. The beast spoken of here seems to be the Roman Empire, as in chapter 13. Now, if you'll turn to the 17th chapter just a moment. How much time do I have? Chapter 17. We'll let him describe to us a little bit more about this beast. Well, he sees a woman on the beast. Verse 3, so he carried me away in the spirit in the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. He's going to tell us more about this one. The Roman Empire, 7 heads, 10 horns. What does he mean? But if the Roman Catholic Church is right that this is Imperial Rome and this is Rome, who's the woman? If it's not the Roman Catholic Church, who's the woman? Nobody seems to have an answer, do they? If it isn't the Roman Catholic Church, there is none. Tells about her riches. Verse 5 tells a little bit more. Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. On this church history chart I put it. I believe in calling a spade, a mother of harlots. Mystery Babylon the Great. Abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunken with the blood of saints. This woman that rode upon old Imperial Rome for so long, according to the book of Daniel, was guilty of the blood of the saints. The description is, wore out the saints of the Most High. That's the 11th horn. And with the blood of martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration, and the angel said to me, why did you marvel? I'll tell you the mystery of the woman. That's what we want to know. But the mystery of the beast that carrieth her, which had 7 heads and 10 horns. We want to know that too. The beast that thou sawest was and is not and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. And go into perdition, and they that dwell on the earth shall wonder. You know, it's a marvel. This thing that happened has never happened since. It hadn't happened before, that an empire that was totally destroyed, like the Roman Empire was in 476, should be revived in total, in image, exact structure, and name as it was in 800 under Charlemagne. And the world wondered. Whose names were not written in the book of life, they wondered. Of course, God's people wouldn't wonder, they know. He's telling us. But the man that doesn't know what he's saying in Revelation would say, what happened? When they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. Now this beast existed. We already covered very carefully the destruction in the west, the total destruction of the empire west, then the total destruction of the empire in the east, so that there was no empire. It was totally destroyed. This was in 1453 at the fall of Constantinople. We read it even from Gibbon when he said that this was in oblivion, wiped out. That, my friend, was the last vestige of it. That was in the east. In the west, where we're primarily talking about, this was revived in 800. Now this one, of course, the Holy Roman Empire, is not in the East. It's limited to this period of time. This is the Holy Roman Empire. This is Charlemagne's time. We might just flip over to Otto the Great. It was not called Holy Roman Empire until Otto the Great's time. But it was, in fact, in Charlemagne's day, which was 800. This did not fall until Napoleon made it fall. Thus, we're talking about the year of about 1805 or so. Let's begin to read a little more and see what he describes. Verse 9. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. That's what you want tonight, isn't it, brother? The mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, or governments, like Isaiah 2. The word that Isaiah saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. It shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains. Among all mountains of all kingdoms, the kingdom of Christ would be higher than all, as Mount Hermon was. And Jesus quoted it in Luke chapter 24. Thus it is written. That's where he quoted. And thus it behooved. The word was to go out from Jerusalem upon 7 mountains on which the woman said. Somebody said, that's Rome. I know. Rome's built on 7 hills. And there are 7 kings. Now he narrows it down. These are not just mountains. These are kings or kingdoms. 5 are fallen. At the time John received this explanation from Jesus, in 96 AD, he tells us 5 are fallen. Starting with kings, there were 5 forms of government. In 31 or 32 BC, Augustus Caesar became the first of the Caesars, and thus was established the imperial form. And he said, 5 are fallen, 1 is. 1 exists at the time of John. That's the imperial form. All of you know that. And the other is not yet come. Now, if there are 7, 5 are fallen, there 1 is, that's number 6. That leaves 1 more to come, and it doesn't exist yet. See, I said 5 are fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. So that's not the Eastern Empire. That lasted to 1453. That lasted till the Turks destroyed Constantinople. But if you'll take a clear look at history, you'll find that after 476, the capital or the rulership was changed from Rome to a place called Ravenna. Right here it is on the map. And that was called the Exarchate Ravenna. The rulers were the exarchs. This little kingdom did not last like the old Roman Empire, a relatively short period of time. If you'll look over here, you'll see it. Lombardy, you see the little horn on the Roman? Follow it. The little horn who plucked up 3 horns, Lombardy, Exarchate of Ravenna, and the state of Rome. Now, the state of Rome continued, but the capital was changed to Ravenna. And he tells us that there was to be another one. This is interesting, isn't it? And the beast that was and is not, even he's the 8th. How can you have an 8th when you only have 7? Very simple. You repeat the 6th one, the imperial form. There are only 7 forms. 1 is, that's number 6. 1 is yet to come, that's number 7. He won't last too long. He fell, and by the time 800 comes, he's there. Let me just back up and illustrate it this way. There happen to be 3 great rulers. You'll see it at this point on history where it says Catholic. One was Charles Martel. In 732, he defeated the Saracens, turned them back. He was a mayor of the court in the Frankish Empire. He wasn't an emperor, he wasn't a king, he was a mayor of the court. The bishop at Rome was having trouble. He said to Charles Martel, I want you to come down and help me because I'm having some trouble from the Lombards. But Charles Martel was a good politician. He said, I'll give you more mature. I'll table that, I'll think about it, and I'll give you an answer later on. The next one, following him, his son Pippin the Short, ascended the same throne And when the bishop at Rome came to him and said, I'm having trouble, he sent the soldiers down and engaged the Lombards, took part of Lombardy away, and gave it to the bishop at Rome. Later on, this is going to be known as the Papal States. You see it right there? Take a look at it. Papal States. He took the first territory away. Back went the soldiers. Then came Charlemagne. Charlemagne was approached by the bishop at Rome. More trouble, more trouble. So he sent down his soldiers and took more territory away, and the ones that he took away are these: the Exarchate of Ravenna, the state of Rome, and Lombardy, and made of them the Papal States. Now maybe we can get a little closer look on what we're talking about. See the Papal States? See Ravenna right there? You see the state of Rome, and this part of Lombardy? This became the Papal States until Napoleon's time, until Victor Emmanuel and Garibaldi. See, at that point, they captured the Papal States. Napoleon subjected these unto France. Victor Emmanuel and Garibaldi removed them, and since the Pope has not had Papal States. And 3 of those were plucked up at a time when they had 10. They had 10. I've listed these. Very simple. We had to come to a time when there were 10. The state of Rome, the Exarchate of Ravenna, Lombardy, Huns, Alans, Franks, Burgundians, Goths, Britons, and Saxons. That's according to many historians. Those composed this empire at the time that the 2 men, Pippin the Short and Charlemagne, took the territory away from the Lombards, Ravenna, and Rome, and gave them to the little horn, the 11th one that speaks great things against the Most High and wears out the saints of Almighty God. You know, this is not forcing anything, is it? We're letting Daniel tell us the truth tonight. And he tells us just a little bit more about this. The beast that was and is not, even he's the 8th, he is of the 7th. You've got to believe that that's when this, if it's of the 7, and there are only 7, and one of us in the imperial form, this is it, because it's the imperial form, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, or kingdoms, which have received no kingdom as yet. They belong to the empire. They didn't have independent kingdoms. They didn't have power of their own. But received power as kings when out the beast. They belong to the empire. Holy Roman Empire, if you please. These have one mind, surely. When the Roman Empire says sneeze, they all sneezed. And shall give their power and strength unto the beast. You'll look at the Dark Ages and see how Christians suffered, and you'll understand. These have one mind and one obedience. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings. And I want you to notice what he says. Verse 16, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore. Now that's jumping ahead, I know, but I want you to get the picture. There will come a time from where we're studying tonight, when those very governments that supported the Catholic Church will hate the whore, and make her desolate, and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire, for God hath put it into their hearts to fulfill his will. God's still on the throne. Now this particular event is past tense to us, but it's future tense to them. Now, just to summarize this, we have seen that there were 4 great kingdoms. Daniel saw it in the image. Nebuchadnezzar saw it. Daniel explained it. Daniel saw it in chapter 7 and in chapter 8. We have seen the great beast composed of 10 kingdoms, another power different, blasphemous, that arose and plucked up 3, and thus established its own state, known as the Papal States. Through the Dark Ages, from Justinian's time, 533, when the persecution began, when Justinian declared the bishop at Rome to be head over all the churches, thus creating this little horn, so strong to influence France and have her soldiers come down and create a state for her. This little horn, strong and powerful, arose, demonstrated itself, wore out the saints of the Most High God, blasphemed God, lasted 1,260 years until she was cut down in the French Revolution. Now, we studied just the other night about the French Revolution. We'll study it again. That brings us to a time of God's divine judgment. Tonight we want to sing a song which we believe to be very appropriate. Very appropriate. Jesus calls us, 383 says, "Or the tumult." We live in it. We live in a time that's changing. This disastrous, if we don't have the power of Christ. This restless sea. But day by day his sweet voice soundeth, saying, "Christian, follow me." I feel sorry for the man, for the woman, for the young person in the next few years that does not know Christ. We need all the stabilizing we can have. And Jesus will give it. And when we sing this song, let's feel it. Let's mean it. Shall we sing? Jesus calls us on the tumult of our lives, while restless sea, day by day his sweet voice sound, saying, "Christian,